Welcome to Life Stories 1, where real stories spark real change. Today, we've got a jaw-dropper. A young mechanic risks it all to help a stranger, not knowing a mysterious figure in the shadows is watching, someone with the power to flip his world upside down. What secret is hiding in this greasy garage, and how does one small act unravel a massive web of deceit? Stay tuned till the end for a twist you won't see coming and a lesson that hits hard. Love gripping tales? Hit like, subscribe, and tap that bell. Let's dive in! The sound of an impact wrench echoed through the garage as Ethan Harper, a 24-year-old mechanic, wiped grease off his hands. His shirt was streaked with oil from a long day's work. He was quick with his hands and even quicker to flare up at injustice. Across the shop, a gray sedan sat still, its hood propped open. An elderly man, about 70, stood nearby, his hands trembling as he clutched a worn leather wallet. His clothes were clean but old, his shoes scuffed from years of wear. "I just need the belt replaced," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I know it's not a big job. I can pay some now, the rest next week." Carl, the burly manager, leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "No dice, old man. This ain't a charity. Pay in full or take your car elsewhere." Ethan, overhearing from the repair bay, clenched his jaw. He'd worked here 3 years, long enough to know Carl never budged, but this didn't sit right. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'll do it." The old man turned, surprised. "Son, I don't want you in trouble." Ethan shook his head. "It's a 15-minute job, don't worry." Carl's face darkened. "Ethan, don't be dumb. You do it free. You're paying for the part out of your check." Ethan didn't flinch. "Fine, dock my pay." Carl scoffed, but didn't stop him, knowing Ethan was stubborn and not caring enough to fight over a belt. As Ethan got to work, a man in a faded mechanic's uniform watched from the waiting area. He was tall, his beard streaked with gray, his face weathered but sharp. No one knew him, just another new guy, a trainee getting his hands dirty. But he wasn't that. He was Leonard Brooks, owner of a 6-location auto repair chain. He'd run the company from afar for 10 years, buying it from an old friend, trusting it'd run itself. Lately, complaints had piled up. Bad service, inflated prices, employees quitting out of the blue. So Leonard did something new. He went undercover. No one recognized him. Most staff had never met him. To them, he was just a name on a paycheck. Now, in the waiting area, he watched one of his best mechanics do the right thing, even at a cost. Ethan worked fast, his fingers swapping the belt in minutes. Done. He wiped his hands and turned to the old man. "You're set to go." The old man looked at him, eyes misty. "Son, you didn't have to." Ethan shrugged. "Yeah, I did." The old man dug into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled $5 bill. "I know it's not much, but—" Ethan pushed it back. "Just drive safe, all right?" The old man hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." As he drove off, Leonard leaned back, arms crossed. He'd seen enough. This wasn't just kindness. It was a sign of the rotten culture festering in his shops, and he wouldn't let it slide. Leonard stayed quiet all day, blending in like a trainee, listening, watching, noting everything. Carl barking orders but barely lifting a finger, young mechanics scrambling to keep up, customers hesitating before approving repairs. Something felt off here. Late afternoon, a woman in her mid-30s pulled her SUV in. She stepped out, clutching her keys, looking uneasy. Ethan wiped his hands and stepped up before anyone else. "Something wrong with the car?" he asked, keeping it light. She paused. "It makes a weird noise when I turn." "I'll take a quick look." Before he could, Carl loomed behind. "Inspection's $80, lady, non-refundable." Her eyes widened. $80 just to check? Carl shrugged. "Shop rules." Ethan frowned but held his tongue. The woman looked flustered, clearly weighing if she could afford it. Leonard, watching from the side, tensed his jaw. She started, then sighed. "Okay, I need to know what's wrong." Carl waved Ethan to handle it and walked off. Ethan popped the hood, listening as he turned the wheel. Minutes later, he stepped out. Your power steering fluid's low, that's the noise. She exhaled, relieved. Oh, that's it? Yeah, Ethan said. I can top it off now, takes a minute. Before he could grab the fluid, Carl cut in. That'll be a full power steering flush, $150. Ethan spun around. She doesn't need a flush, just a top-off. Not your call, Carl said, arms crossed. Full service or nothing. The woman glanced between them, uneasy. Leonard saw Ethan's fists clench. I can't afford that, she admitted. Isn't there another way? Carl shut her down. No discounts. Pay up or no fix. Ethan exhaled hard, holding back. He turned to her. Go to the auto parts store nearby. Grab a bottle of power steering fluid, $5. You can pour it in yourself. Carl's face hardened. You serious right now? Ethan ignored him. That's all you need, he told her. Don't let anyone tell you different. She gave him a grateful look and left fast. Carl rounded on Ethan. You trying to lose us money? I'm trying to be honest, Ethan shot back. Carl sneered. Honesty doesn't pay bills. He stepped closer, voice low. Keep pulling stunts like that. You won't last here long. Ethan stood his ground, but Leonard saw the strain in his shoulders. This kid was fighting a fight he shouldn't have to. Leonard had seen enough. Carl's way wasn't just bad management. It was crooked. Overcharging, pushing unneeded work, intimidating staff into silence. If Carl ran this place like that, what about the other shops? Leonard stood, brushed off his hands, and walked over. Something wrong? He asked casually. Carl barely glanced at him. Nah, just straightening the kid out. Ethan looked ready to argue, but held back. Leonard turned to him. You always this honest with customers? Ethan paused, then nodded. Yeah. Leonard nodded thoughtfully. Good. Carl scoffed. Good? Who are you to say what's good? Leonard's mouth twitched up. You'll find out soon. Carl rolled his eyes and walked off, muttering. Ethan watched him go, then asked Leonard, You new here? Sort of, Leonard said. Ethan studied him, then shrugged. You'll figure it out. Leonard already had, and he wasn't done. As afternoon faded, the garage quieted. Leonard stayed in the background, blending in. But his mind was set. Carl treated this place like his personal ATM, squeezing customers dry and stomping out honesty. Ethan was the opposite, the kind of worker any owner would want. Leonard knew if this happened here, it was likely elsewhere too. He wouldn't let it stand. The moment came fast. A man in a button-up shirt and slacks walked in, looking frustrated. Carl took the lead. What can we do for you? The man pulled out a folded receipt. I got a brake job here last week. Now my car's grinding. Another shop said my rotors weren't replaced like I paid for. Leonard, near a tool rack, watched closely. Carl barely glanced at the receipt. No way. We do everything by the book. The man's jaw tightened. They showed me. The rotors aren't new. I paid over $600. I want answers. Carl sighed like he was humoring a kid. Look, I don't know what they told you, but we don't cut corners. Maybe they're after your cash. Ethan, tightening a lug nut nearby, stopped and turned slightly, listening. The man tapped the receipt. I want my service records. Carl's face darkened. That's company info. We don't hand it out. Leonard stepped forward, pulling off his greasy cap, standing tall as the owner he was. That's a lie. Carl whipped around. Excuse me? Leonard faced the customer. You've got a right to see your records. If you paid for new rotors, you should have gotten them. The man blinked, confused. And who are you? Leonard met his eyes. Leonard Brooks, I own this company. The garage went dead silent. Carl froze, posture stiff. That's not funny. Not a joke, Leonard said. I've been here all day, watching, listening. He turned to the customer. I'll make sure you get a full refund, and I'll dig into what happened with your car. The man exhaled, tension easing. That's all I wanted. Leonard faced Carl. Got anything to say? Carl forced a laugh, but it fell flat. Come on, it's a mix-up. Maybe a tech screwed up. No, Leonard cut in. It's a pattern. He pointed at Ethan. I saw this kid do the right thing twice today. Meanwhile, you're scamming customers and threatening staff who don't play along. Carl's bravado slipped. I was just following company policy. Leonard's voice stayed even, but it cut deep. I write the policy. What you're doing isn't it. Carl opened his mouth, then shut it. Leonard turned to Ethan. How long you been here? 3 years, Ethan said. Ever get promoted? Ethan shook his head. Leonard glanced at Carl. And yet he's the only one with integrity. He looked back at Ethan. Ever thought about running this place? Ethan frowned. What? I need someone who cares about customers, does the job right, won't let people get ripped off. You up for it? Ethan glanced around, processing. I mean, yeah, but you've proven yourself, Leonard said. I need people like you in charge. Carl jumped in. You can't just fire me on the spot. Leonard met his gaze, unflinching. Yes, I can. Carl tried to speak, but nothing came out. Leonard turned to Ethan. We'll talk details later. Finish your shift. You've got a shop to run. Ethan nodded slowly, still catching up. Leonard addressed the staff. Things are changing. If you've done your job right, you're fine. If you've cut corners, you won't last. The message was clear. The silence wasn't just shock. It was the weight of a shift. A company gone astray was being set right, sparked by one honest mechanic who wouldn't look away. That night, the air still felt heavy. Workers eyed Ethan differently. He felt it too, hours ago. Just a mechanic doing what's right, now handed responsibility he hadn't sought but wouldn't refuse. Leonard stayed as the garage emptied, watching Ethan lock tools and wipe benches. The end-of-shift routine felt weightier, like something permanent had shifted. Ethan exhaled, leaning on a metal cart, not overwhelmed but thoughtful. Leonard leaned on the counter, arms crossed. Silence stretched, then he spoke. Thinking of walking away? Ethan shook his head. No way. Leonard nodded, unsurprised. Good. Ethan looked over, sharp but not accusing. You really own this place? All the locations? Leonard confirmed it. Ethan mulled it over. So why wait till now to check what's going on? Leonard didn't dodge. I trusted the wrong people to run it. Thought good numbers meant everything was fine. Ethan nodded slowly. Numbers looked good, 'cause Carl squeezed every penny, need it or not. Leonard knew that already. Nobody said a thing, Ethan added. People need jobs, families, bills. Call out management and your hours get cut, or you're stuck with the worst tasks till you quit. Leonard took it in, no argument. He'd called shots from a distance too long, letting guys like Carl thrive. Ever run a shop? He asked. Ethan shook his head. No, but I know how it should be done. Leonard stood straight. That's a start. You won't be alone, you'll have support, and I'll be around more. Ethan studied him, then nodded. I'm in. Leonard offered a hand. Ethan took it after a beat, sealing the shift that started hours ago. Outside, distant traffic hummed. Ethan locked the door, pocketing the keys. He looked like the same mechanic from that morning, but something had changed. Leonard saw it. Responsibility. The realization that from now on, things would be different. Not just for Ethan, but for every worker stuck under bad leadership. Leonard came expecting problems, not the solution standing in his shop, greasy and doing right when no one watched. As they parted, Leonard knew this wouldn't be his last surprise visit. Today proved distance had blinded him, and he wouldn't let it happen again. Next morning, Ethan arrived early. The garage felt different, like the air carried change. He'd spent the night mulling over yesterday's twists. Leonard was already there, clipboard in hand, standing outside. Ethan pulled his jacket tight against the chill, still adjusting to the idea that the guy he'd pegged as a worker owned it all. Leonard looked up. Sleep any? Not really, Ethan admitted. Leonard nodded like he got it. Lot went down yesterday. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. What now? Leonard tapped the clipboard. Now we fix it. I checked the numbers. How Carl ran this place, we should have had more complaints than what hit corporate. Ethan wasn't shocked. Most people take the hit and move on. No one bothers reporting if they think nothing changes. That's the problem, Leonard said. I'm not just looking here. I've got 5 more shops, and I need to know how bad it is. Ethan considered it. You think the other managers are like that? Don't know yet, Leonard said, but I'm not waiting to find out the hard way. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight. One bad manager was trouble. A system letting them flourish was worse. Leonard handed over the clipboard. Take a look. Ethan scanned it. Recent service orders, parts inventory, what was actually used. Discrepancies jumped out. He breathed slow. They charged for work they didn't do. Leonard gripped the clipboard tighter. Looks like it. Ethan handed it back. What's the plan? We start by making it right, Leonard said. I'm pulling records for every shady job the past 6 months. If people paid for work they didn't get, they're getting refunded. Ethan exhaled sharply. That'll cost a ton. It's the cost of doing right, Leonard replied. I'd rather take the hit now than let this place keep scamming. Ethan respected that. He'd known too many bosses obsessed with profit. Someone owning up and fixing things was new. Other mechanics trickled in, casting curious glances. Word of Carl's firing spread fast, and everyone waited to see what had happened. Leonard gathered the team, keeping it short. Carl was gone. Things would change. If anyone was pressured into shady work, speak now. No punishment for honesty, only for keeping up the game. Most looked relieved, some nervous, but no one argued. After, Ethan stood by Leonard again. Think they'll come clean? Some will, Leonard said. Others'll wait to see if we mean it. Ethan eyed the clipboard. Do we? Leonard met his gaze. Yeah, we do. Ethan nodded, rolling his shoulders like he was settling into it. All right, let's get to work. Now, here's the lesson from all this. This story shows the power of honesty and compassion in a messed-up system. Ethan didn't just help a couple customers. He sparked a chain reaction that fixed a whole company, proving small acts of integrity can ripple big. For Leonard, it's a wake-up call. Leadership can't just trust numbers. You've got to see the ground truth to catch and correct what's wrong. Change starts with one person standing up and a boss willing to act, building a fairer place for everyone.